Cells contains graphic and occasionally violent content, which some listeners may find disturbing. Cells is not recommended for children. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Cells. We want to thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed our first ever episode. If for some reason you're hearing this and you haven't listened to episode 1, you're definitely going to want to go back and listen to that first. If you have listened to episode 1 and you're ready to continue on this journey with us to find out what comes next, grab your tissues and buckle in, because here we go. Cole, want to start us off?
5 months had passed since Michella's brutal murder. It was August 4th, 1986, nearing the end of summer break for 13-year-old Jennifer Bastian. Jenny was an accomplished cyclist, and she was currently training for a YMCA bicycle tour of Lopez Island, which is a part of the San Juan Islands in northern Washington state and about an hour north of Tacoma. So she followed a training regimen to prepare for her bike tour. She would put on her bike shorts, strap on her white helmet with red stripes, and hop on her shiny new metallic 18-speed Schwinn Tour Deluxe, complete with bright blue saddlebags. And she would head to Point Defiance Park. She would often put bricks or bath towels in her saddlebags to simulate riding with camping gear, just like she would on her tour. So Jenny would sometimes ride with a friend and sometimes ride alone. In fact, Jenny would make this ride to Point Defiance Park several times a week. The ride was 30 blocks to the park, around the paved path called 5 Mile Drive, and then ride 30 blocks back home.
So, just quickly, Point Defiance Park isn't like Puget Creek Park. It's similar in that it appears to be very safe because there are people constantly coming and going, but it's a city park, a giant city park. While Puget Creek Park was bordered by 60-odd acres of dense woods, the park itself was just a tiny little spot on the corner, and you could go there without ever entering the wooded area. Point Defiance, however, was 702 acres of park, with woods and trails and everything incorporated all together. At 702 acres, this actually puts Point Defiance Park at one of the biggest city parks in the entire country. It literally sits on its own peninsula, for goodness sake. It jets out into the South Puget Sound, pointing across the water to Gig Harbor and northward to Vashon Island. There was and still is tons of stuff to do at the park. There's a zoo and aquarium, a rose garden, Japanese garden, rhododendron garden, several beaches, hundreds of trails, lots of picnic spots. And by the way, these trails that I mentioned are in the woods trails. So the path that Jenny would take her bike on was a paved path that goes through kind of the whole entire park. But then in between there's all these dense woods, and there's like hiking trails and walking trails that are all throughout the wooded area. So there's also a dog park, a ferry dock, a boat ramp, a boat house, and I'm sure more that I missed. And actually, if you want to see maps and photos of the park and specifically 5 Mile Drive, check out our website because we've got a bunch.
Yeah, just go to our website and select this episode, and there's a ton of images and documents there. There's also a video that it's a video that we found on YouTube of a rider on a bike, probably with a GoPro, doing the whole 5 Mile trail. So you can really get that visual. On August 4th, around 1:30 p.m., Jenny called her dad, Ralph Bastian, and asked him for permission to go on her ride. And considering how much of an experienced rider Jenny was and how often she made this trip, it's not surprising Ralph said yes. So once around 5 Mile Drive and home by 6:30. So at about 2:30 p.m., she left a note for her mom, Patty Bastian, saying that she was headed out for her ride and she'd be back by 6:30. So thinking nothing of it, Jenny's dad and mom went about their evenings. 6:30 came around. Jenny wasn't home. 7:30 came and went. Then 8:30 passed. And Jenny's dad really started to worry. And she called her mom, Jenny's mom, Patty, at work. And Patty left work immediately and headed home to try to figure out what to do. They called neighbors, they called her friends, and ultimately, when Jenny was still not home by 10 p.m., they called 911. In an interview, Patty remembered that after the police came and took a report, that a chaplain came to their door within a half an hour to provide comfort and counsel to the family. His name was Chaplain Young, and he was there as a support to the family, but also an agent of the police department. Part of the chaplain's duties were to be like this liaison between the law enforcement and the family and relaying any information and updates between the two that they seemed important for the case.
I'm not sure how I would feel about that. I mean, it would be comforting, I guess, if I were religious. But then again, even if I were religious, I think it would be upsetting to have a chaplain show up. Like, it would feel like they definitely thought my kid was dead or something else really bad.
Yeah, but maybe it's better than having to deal with the police officers because sometimes they can be intimidating.
Yeah, and I mean, even though they have a little bit of training in how to talk to families, it's kind of more like death notifications, maybe.
Maybe they don't tell them it's a chaplain right off the bat because it's like, I don't know. I agree, like last rites thing.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I just see someone like a man of God and it freaks me out. So in this case, the police had again, like in Michella's case, immediately sprung into action. The responding officer, Officer Wiltfong, was placed in charge of the search by his sergeant. Wiltfong was not messing around. And right off the bat, he requested a full search and rescue call of all search and rescue resources, starting with the Department of Emergency Services Communications and the Northwest Bloodhound Search and Rescue Group. He cited his concern that the circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Jenny were very similar to that of Michella Welch. Wiltfong then relayed to another officer that it was unknown if a complete check of the Bastian home had been done by officers and not just by the family, and it would need to be completed before the department was able to call in all of the volunteer groups. Wiltfong additionally relayed that at this point, very little was actually known about Jenny's background. So, simultaneously, while Wiltfong is organizing the search efforts, other responding officers headed to the park to begin searching, while more officers responded to the Bastian home to thoroughly check and clear it and to get more detailed information that may help with their search efforts. After a few hours with no luck, and after confirming Jenny was not in the home, at about 1 a.m., the police called in the Northwest Bloodhound Search and Rescue Group. The team responded to the Bastian home and asked Jenny's family for some items of hers, and the Bloodhounds immediately started their tracking right from Jenny's house. The dogs were able to track her from the house to Point Defiance Park, around 5 Mile Drive, and they continued to track until they emerged from 5 Mile Drive at about 5:30 a.m., unable to locate her.
I really encourage you guys to go to sellspodcast.com and click on the episode because we have an image where it shows exactly where Jenny's house is, how far it took to get to 5 Mile Drive, where 5 Mile Drive is, and also in the same map, it shows you where Michella's house is and where the park is. And you can see how Jenny's house is even further south than Michella's house and where Michella went missing. So she had to go all the way past all of that, all the way up into the peninsula. It's a good visual.
I appreciate a good visual.
I made it.
Dork. Okay. So they emerge from 5 Mile Drive at 5:30 a.m., unable to locate her. And then it's reported that the bloodhounds lost track of the scent in the area of the Y in the road. So when you go and look at Cole's lovely visual, you will see where the Y in the road is. It's like the path loops around, and it's where basically the start and the end meet.
Right. The Y, one part of the Y is a start to the right, and one part's finish, and then the down part of the Y is the rest of the city.
Right. So the dog handlers decided, just in case for good measure, that they would take the dogs out to run a search again, while another officer, also for good measure, headed to Puget Creek Park to do a quick search of Michella's crime scene, just in case. The dogs ran the same track and did not locate any variations from their original track. The officer at Puget Creek Park did not locate any sign of Jenny either. Then at 7:05 a.m., the bloodhounds and handlers were released from the scene. At this point, the responding officer was contacted by the chaplain, asking on behalf of the family for an update on the search to this point. The chaplain also relayed to the officer that Jenny's grandmother lived only about 1.5 miles away, and she had not yet been made aware that Jenny was missing. And as such, her home had not yet been checked either. Chaplain Young advised the officer that he would assist with notifying the grandmother and arranging the search of the house. This is why I guess having a chaplain would be a good thing, right?
That must have been so hard for her parents. I cannot imagine what it's like to just have to sit there and wait and not know anything. Patty said she remembers it being really nice weather that night and just the scores of officers, dogs, search and rescue parties that scoured the park for her daughter all night long. But the police were not giving up anytime soon. They closed off the park to the public, and they took the next step by calling in additional search and rescue resources. First, they called in the Tacoma fire station boats that conducted a search of all the beaches at Point Defiance Park. The boats were used so that search and rescue personnel could visually inspect the beaches at the lower areas of the cliffs that they weren't able to access by foot. Unfortunately, they too had negative results. Still not giving up, the officers' next mission was to find a helicopter. So Channel 5 Television had a helicopter and agreed to allow the police to use it to aid in the aerial search. So coordinating with Channel 5, the fire department, the police department, the air traffic control, the search commenced. They completed a full area search of Point Defiance Park, along with the route that Jenny would have taken to get there, and the surrounding area at very low altitudes of only about 100 to 200 feet from the ground. They even did an aerial search of Puget Creek Park as well, where Michella went missing. But again, they found nothing. No sign of Jenny or her bike with the bright blue saddlebags. At this point, it was getting really late, and they were losing daylight. So officers returned to Central Station to brief administration on what they had done so far and decide what to do next. It was decided to request additional resources from Explorer Search and Rescue in order to enable more in-field communication between the searchers. The Explorer Search and Rescue organization had the biggest arsenal of communication devices like walkie-talkies, radios, etc. Additionally, the decision was made to redeploy the bloodhounds to retrace the route. But this time, they would be accompanied by German Shepherd air scent tracking dogs as well. With their plan in place, they contacted the Tacoma Department of Emergency Services to update them to advise that the search would be suspended for the night at 10 p.m. due to the fact that the search locations were way too close to unprotected cliff areas, making it very dangerous for the dogs and their handlers in the dark. They further advised that the search would resume at 5 a.m. the following day on August 6th. With that, all additional resources were approved and police continued to keep the park closed to the public.
Police and search and rescue teams met again on Wednesday, August 6th at 4:45 a.m. to coordinate and resume the search for Jenny. It is noted in police reports that when the search and rescue volunteers met back up that morning, there were also almost as many, if not more, members of the press and media on scene as well.
Vultures.
Seriously. I mean, I'm all about free press, don't get me wrong. But dang, sometimes they are just vultures. They actually caused a bit of a challenge for police because as the police were trying to coordinate the dogs and the handlers and the searchers, the press was trying to get into the briefing point, trying to hear what was going on, which would obviously be bad and could really put the entire case, if there ever was one brought, in jeopardy. So once the media was under control, the responding officer was able to complete the brief and move the base of operations to the entry of 5 Mile Drive, which was directly above Owens Beach. Again, feel free to look at the map that's on our website. So the dogs, their handlers, and the searchers split into 3 groups to tackle specific areas of the park. Each group was highly experienced in searching the type of terrain and the areas to which they were assigned. The search continued from 6 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. At that point, the park and the park officials and whoever was in charge of the park opened the zoo and aquarium areas, only these 2 areas, and with appropriate security personnel in place to prevent civilians from entering any other parts of the park. It was probably because those are literally the only places in the park that charge money. Capitalism at its finest. Anyway, at 1:30 p.m., the search effort was again upgraded, and even more volunteer search units were requested, approved, and deployed. I want to take a minute to paint a picture for you of just how massive this search was. So, I'm going to name all the groups that responded, in addition to the ones that we already discussed. I'm not going to name them again. So here it goes. Kitsap County Search and Rescue. Kitsap Emergency Search and Rescue. Additional units from the Northwest Bloodhounds, the Olympic Mountain Rescue, Moto Search and Rescue, TACBRA, I'm not sure what that sounds or what that stands for, 4x4 Rescue Council, King County Search and Rescue, King County Emergency Search and Rescue, additional German Shepherd Air Scent Search Dogs, Thurston County Emergency Search and Rescue, Pierce County Emergency Search and Rescue, Tacoma Mountain Rescue, Grays Harbor Ground Searchers, Seattle Mountain Rescue, Pierce County Sheriff's Posse, Edgewood Hill Willies, probably my favorite, Motorcycle Amateur Special Services, Red Cross Disaster Team, Black Hills Composite Search and Rescue Team, and West Coast Search Dogs. That is a lot of agencies. Amazing how the whole community and everyone from other communities rallied to really try to find Jenny. So these resources were requested at 1:30 p.m. and they started arriving on site by about 5:30 p.m. and were immediately assigned specific areas to search, and they started using a closed grid pattern. At approximately 8 p.m., a combined and detailed briefing was held with all known facts related to Jenny being relayed. Most of the information about Jenny herself came from the chaplain service, as they had been with the family the entire time since Jenny disappeared and had built a rapport with them. This relationship was so important because it not only created a buffer for the family, but it also expedited information gathering from the family. That night at about 11:30 p.m., the search was downgraded for the night, again due to darkness and the hazards it created. It resumed the following morning, Thursday, August 7th, and full search operations had restarted by 6:30 a.m. The volunteers continued tirelessly searching the entire day long until around 8:30 p.m., when police called for a review of the search effort to this point. It was determined that most of the area within the park boundaries and those selected areas outside of the park boundaries had been searched at least twice, and in most cases 3 times, by one type of unit or another. It was then determined that as the units that were still in the field completed their assignments, that they would be signed out and sent home. The search of the park was placed in stand down. In total, from August 5th to August 7th, there were 460 volunteers, approximately 230 people per day, that searched for 5,806 hours and who drove 11,860 miles to, during, and from the search. The search for Jennifer Bastian was officially suspended, not closed, with the Washington State Department of Emergency Management at 4:56 p.m. on Saturday, August 9th, 1986, with the understanding that if any new information came to light, the search could be reestablished.
Wow, so much work was done by so many people on that search, and more officers were working other angles at the same time. They were interviewing potential witnesses and Jenny's friends and family. And one of the first witnesses interviewed was a friend of hers that Jenny actually stopped and talked to on her way to the park that day. Now, in several of the articles we've read from media sources and online reports, it says that Jenny always rode with her friend and that she was supposed to go with her friend that day to ride, making it seem as though this was like a prearranged plan, but then at the last minute, the friend couldn't go and backed out. And that's just not accurate. Don't believe everything you read. Because we know from her parents' statements that Jenny made this ride several times a week and often all by herself, and that was totally normal. But where we think the media got this angle from was probably this witness. On our way to the park, Jenny stopped and talked to this friend around 2:15 p.m. and asked her if she would go with her on the bike ride to the park, but her friend had told her that she had just come from the mall and declined the invite. Jenny said okay and told her friend to call her later. Another important interview for building an accurate timeline included 3 boys who went to school with Jenny. The boys said that they saw her around 4:10 p.m., riding her bike in the opposite direction as they were going on 5 Mile Drive. But they said they saw a man riding near Jenny, but that she didn't seem concerned or in danger. So police considered this a credible sighting because, similar to the classmate witness in Michella's case, these boys knew Jenny personally to be able to identify her. So we know that she definitely made it to the park and that she was still riding at the park around 4 p.m. The boys also provided a description of the man that was riding the bike behind her. He was a white male, 21 to 25, between 5'10 and 6'2, medium build, sandy hair, black helmet, black bike, and white tennis shoes with 2 red stripes. This description led to a composite sketch being created and released on the KIRO TV news broadcast on August 8th.
Ah, geez, with the composite sketches already.
Yeah, but if you go on sellspodcast.com to this episode, and we posted the composite sketch from Michella's, and there's 2 of them, but the one that Mary the hairdresser, said that she saw the dude that was acting all creepy. Kind of looks like this composite sketch, but this dude has glasses on. I don't know. They look really similar to me.
Okay, so I have it pulled up and I see what you're saying. They do look similar, except this one has sunglasses on. I can see it.
Yeah, I can see it too.
Oof. So like we talked about last episode, still with the composites, the same thing happened here. A ton of reports came in after the sketch was released, and we'll get to those. However, I want to talk first about a few witness reports that came in prior to the composite being released. These were people calling in sightings from that day that didn't know Jenny. So, I mean, the police probably gave them a little bit less credence than, classmates that definitely knew who she was, as well as concerned citizens who wanted to report strange behavior. One woman that stood out to me was named Maxine. She called into police to report that on June 20th, 1986, her 13-year-old daughter was chased by a man while she was riding her bicycle, and she thought it may be related to what happened to Michella and Jenny. She gave a description of his car, but she didn't have much more information. And Maxine was not the only one calling in reports like these. There were several teenage girls that had been approached or followed and scared by strange men. I mean, I think men are strange in general, but this is a problem. I would have been freaking out. I mean, I'm a mother to girls, and I don't know. I don't feel like they would be leaving the house. I can't imagine how these incidents not only changed the lives of the families involved, but how they must have impacted the entire community. I bet you didn't see as many kids out and about riding bikes and playing without an adult anymore. And also another notable report I found was a witness named John who reported seeing a man at around 1:30 in the afternoon on August 4th, the day Jenny disappeared, in the woods near Owens Beach. Now, if you remember, Owens Beach, or if you look at the handy dandy map, Owens Beach is right above the Y in 5 Mile Drive. He said that the man immediately ducked back into the woods and out of sight when he realized that John was watching him. Just creepy.
Isn't that what Mary said too? That was what she saw, a guy acting all creepy that would jump in and out of the bushes. No, that was another
That was
lady.
the other one. That was the other composite sketch.
That was like a week late. Yeah.
Yeah, but she's the one that created the second composite sketch in Michella's case. She's the one that said the guy was she would look at him and he'd jump in the bushes, and then he'd jump out and she'd look at him and he'd jump in the bushes. Like, if they're not the same person, there is a bunch of freaking weirdos in Tacoma, Washington.
Glad I wasn't born in Tacoma, Washington in the 80s.
Seriously.
Sorry, people who are in Tacoma, Washington.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe it's better now.
No offense. It's a really pretty place, though. So for me, the most important witness report I read was from a man named Robert Egan. Robert contacted the police the next day, once it all broke that Jenny was missing, to report that he saw Jenny at 5:45 p.m. Where? At the Y in the road of 5 Mile Drive, where you either leave the park or continue to head north back up the trail. What made him such a great witness was the fact that he had so many details and that he told the police within a day of her being reported missing. And then we'll get to this later, but when he is re-interviewed later on down the line, and he was able to recall the exact same details months later. So he remembered seeing Jenny and said that he remembered because he did a double take, because at first he thought she was a boy, and because she looked like a professional bicyclist because of how nice her equipment was. He said he was taken aback a bit when they were both yielding kind of to each other at the stop sign at the Y in the road, and he looked and realized, oh shoot, that's a little girl. So then he went on and she was still waiting there. So he has no idea where she went, which direction she went. So from this witness, we know that at 5:45 p.m., the day she went missing, Jenny was still alive and was at the end of 5 Mile Drive. We also know that this was the exact spot where the bloodhounds lost her scent. What we don't know is what happened to her next. Did she go back around the trail again?
Probably not, because it's 5:45 and she said she would be home at 6:30, by 6:30. And as you can see in the map, she's got to go down into the city.
Say she did decide to go one more quick loop, because I bet riding a bike, you could get around that not that long. I don't know. I mean, I don't know
5 miles.
Timing it, how long it would take her to get home.
I mean, possibility.
So did she go back up around 5 Mile Drive again? And if she did someone take her from 5 Mile Drive after 5:45 p.m.? Or did she leave the park? Was she taken on her way home after she left Point Defiance?
So to recap, the park was closed down to the public for 3 days to allow police, along with several search and rescue volunteer agencies, to search for Jenny and her bike. But despite searching these areas 2 to 3 times each, they still found nothing.
Right. So at first, I'm thinking, well, obviously then she isn't there, right? She was abducted and taken somewhere else. But then I looked at the topographical map of that park, and holy moly, the terrain, the elevations, the cliffs. At first, I didn't realize and couldn't comprehend that there were cliffs in a park. I mean, they legitimately could search 1,000,000 times and still might miss her. And this is probably why and how Jenny's mom was clinging to the hope or the thought that Jenny had just maybe gone off trail or gone onto one of the hiking trails and was in there somewhere injured. Like, I can see that. I think that's what I would hold on to too.
At this point, the search had turned cold. If she was a taken, then we're past the 72-hour mark, and we all know the statistics that finding someone alive or finding the perpetrator after that point is not that good.
No, not good. And even if she is injured, like her mother is clinging to, past the 72-hour mark, it's probably not great chances that they're going to find her alive at that point either.
I'll never forget that interview that I read in the News Tribune that Patty Bastian had told them. She told the reporters that while the park had been closed off, that her and her husband Ralph walked down 5 Mile Drive, and she remembered just being filled with the feeling that if this was the last thing her daughter saw right before she died, then wasn't it a gift? Patty said that looking up through those trees, hearing the birds, and smelling the salt water, that she could not think of a more beautiful thing to lay your eyes on.
That is so sad. And remember that interview that we saw where Patty was talking about, it must have been, I'm thinking it was like the next day after Jenny was reported missing, and how actually Michella's mom came to their house and to offer, I don't know, condolences or support or whatever. And Patty was nice to her and said, thank you for coming. But then she said, that I thought was interesting, that after Barbara, Michella's mom, left, her friend, Patty's friend, was also there. And she kind of turned to her friend and said, I'm not sure why she came here. We're not in the same situation. My daughter's not dead. She's just out there hurt somewhere. Then maybe this was like a little bit after that or something, and she's trying to come to grips with the possible reality that her child may not be injured out there, or if she is, she may be dead by this point. I don't know. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, if Barbara showed up, then I'm thinking the police probably had to give her Patty's address. So the police themselves were already kind of relating the two.
Oh, yeah, for sure. In the beginning, the very first responding officer, the reason that he kicked things into gear and called in all the search people so quickly was because he actually said, this kind of seems similar to Michella Welch, so let's get hopping.
Of course, just because the search was suspended and the critical time frame had passed, that didn't mean the investigation was over. Police continued interviewing and canvassing and taking calls on the tip line, and one tip came in on August 26th at about 8 p.m., 22 days after Jenny had disappeared. A jogger contacted Park Police to report that he runs the 5-mile trail with a friend, and since Jenny had gone missing, they've taken this usual run of theirs 4 times. He believes that he has seen the man from the composite sketch 3 out of the 4 times. He described the Y in the path on 5 Mile and told police that he always takes a right at the Y, and that is where he saw this man, who he said was always wearing heavy clothes like a brown coat or a flannel shirt, blue jeans, and construction boots.
Okay, wait a minute. Wasn't it summer?
Right? Yeah.
That's super odd.
Yeah. That would stick out to me too. But even more odd, he reported that a really strange and foul odor in that same area. For whatever reason, police took this tip seriously, and by 9 p.m., Tacoma police officers and canines were there attempting to locate the source of the odor. They unfortunately had negative results. 2 days later, on August 28th, this is now 24 days since Jenny's gone missing. So it's not clear why, but Tacoma police decided they needed to research the area of the odor. So at 1:20 p.m., Tacoma PD officers, a Metro Park officer, a dog handler, and his German Shepherd search dog arrived to conduct another search of the area where the odor was reported, close to the Y in the road. Officer Moore and handler Gideon headed into the woods. At 2 p.m., the responding detective on scene, Detective Margison, was told the dog had found something.
Detective Margison was directed south down a few paths and continued walking about 200 feet off the paved path into the woods. And this is what we had talked about, what I had mentioned earlier that confused me at first, because 5 Mile Drive was paved and I couldn't picture and didn't realize that there's woods all around 5 Mile Drive and actually in the middle of 5 Mile Drive, and all through those woods were these kind of like off-road or hiking or trails that were well-worn paths through the woods. Margison continued into the woods until he was able to hear Officer Moore call out from a heavily brushy area. Moore simply said, "We found her." Margison entered the brushy area and found the officer and the dog handler sitting on a log, looking ill. Officer Moore pointed in a westerly direction and simply said, "She's in there." Now, I want to try to describe the spot for you, but it's difficult, so bear with me. First, in order to enter the area, the detective followed a small path, not a well-worn path, not, just like a small path that someone had made by walking through the woods to the west. That led to what looked like a hole. He literally had to crawl on his hands and knees to get to the opening to look inside. Jennifer's small body was laying in a clearing under a kind of natural canopy made of vines and bushes and a fallen down maple tree. He said that the clearing was approximately 5 feet wide or square and approximately 4 feet high. Now, this is just his rough observation. The detective backed out of the site and, realizing what he had found, he directed Officer Moore and handler Gideon to leave the immediate area as well. They had found her. the search was over. It had been 24 days, and there she was. She appeared to be positioned, laid on her back, with her arms to her sides and her legs straight, with her pants and bathing suit bottoms around her ankle. Just like Michella. Blonde hair, blue eyes, in a popular park, on a school break, sexually assaulted, murdered, and left. The search was over. Now Margeson knew the scene needed to be preserved as best they could. Meanwhile, other searchers that were also searching the area had located Jenny's bike. It was lying deep in the brush, but only about 30 feet away from her body. Officers made notifications and immediately took action to secure and preserve the bike scene as well. As senior officers were made aware of the situation, it was decided to call in for assistance from neighboring Pierce County's Green River Task Force to assist in processing the scene due to their expertise in outdoor crime scenes.
Wait, as in the Green River Killer, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The Green River Killer had started killing in 1982, and the task force was created right around actually 1986. After the police started consulting with, I had to add this in here, none other than Ted freaking Bundy on the cases. Because, imagine this, Ted Bundy was also a native of Tacoma. And he told the police he was an expert on the outdoor areas and that he could help them. They actually even went to see him in prison in Florida and everything. Really mind hunters kind of shit. The Green River Killer killed 48 people. It was crazy. Anyway, moving along. They also
Wait, but did they catch the Green River Killer around that time? Was it, or did the task force not, they just named him and they didn't know who he was at the time that they were searching for Jenny?
No, they didn't catch him. He was a suspect since 1983. Then in 1984, he passed a polygraph, but he was still a suspect, kind of, even though he passed the polygraph, because we know those aren't admissible. And then, so in 1987, they took hair and saliva samples from him. He wasn't officially arrested for the crimes until, DNA technology linked him to the crime scenes in 2001.
So that's crazy. So police officers that were working on Michella's case, and as we mentioned, there was other girls who went missing, thought that Jenny could be related to them, but then you have the Green River Task Force coming in thinking that this could be related to theirs.
Yeah, they didn't know. I mean, there was just killing all over the place at this point in time. But I think mostly they were called in because all of the Green River Killers victims were left outside. Some of them were left actually in the river. So this task force had become really, really, really good at processing those crime scenes. So they also called in the Thurston County Deputy Coroner. His name was Mark Papworth. And they called him in because Papworth had recently given a class in Olympia, Washington on serial killings. And he was recognized as an expert in certain matters of evidence, again, that pertain to outdoor crime scenes. So they're pulling out all the stops, trying to get as much evidence as they can from this scene. At this point, since they were in different counties, though, and it was already getting dark out, it was too late for the coroner or the task force to respond to the scene. So the decision was made to secure the scene until they could reconvene in the morning, which meant uniformed officers literally standing guard of her body in the woods, in the dark, all night long. The next morning, the Thurston County Coroner, Mark Papworth, along with Tacoma PD, began the painstaking process of recovering Jenny's body and preserving as much evidence as possible from what was left after 24 days in the unrelenting heat. He then wrote up a report of his observations from the scene. This report was pretty sciencey, so bear with me while I explain and try to interpret. Papworth first talks about her bicycle, and he wrote how he examined the pathway of potential entry through the woods about 30 feet east of the bike, like we said before. What I found interesting while I was reading this was his description of the pathway to the bike. He described the same fork in the trail that the jogger who had originally reported the foul odor had described. He said there was a large maple tree sitting back in the woods a bit near the fork, and that he and Detective Werner had spotted this faint track that was left by the bicycle tires. I'm amazed it was still visible on the forest floor after 24 days, and it was leading deeper into the woods from that well-traveled trail. He described the tracks as going through the regular floor of the woods, over 2 dead limbs, breaking them, and through a patch of moss. They were able to follow the tracks right to where the bike laid. The rear wheel supported saddlebags, which were bulky from weights that had been added. Papworth stated that due to these observations of the scene, it appeared that the bike, and this is the important part, was wheeled hastily through the woods and was lifted bodily to its final position, suggesting some strength in the person wheeling it. So what I hear from this, and tell me if you think the same thing, Cole, that Jenny didn't wheel it there. They're saying that the killer wheeled it there. And I mean, if it was hastily, do you think that he planned it? You know what I mean? Like he just discarded it. It was like hasty and he went through, this is what I'm picturing. He's like running it through the woods and just kind of like picks it up and dumps it.
Well, yeah. And that also makes me think about where was Jenny when this happened? Like,
right.
It's the Y on the road. This is the entrance, the exit. This is where everyone comes in and out. It's a busy area. And why didn't she scream? Why didn't anyone hear her?
Yep.
A scream people would have heard. So
yeah, I mean, because the dude just saw her at 5:45 right near the spot, that witness.
How do you get her off of the bike? Was she getting off to do something? And he kind of like, I think about Michella's, did he hit her over the head?
Yeah.
Was she unconscious? Did she drag her and then go get the bike real quick?
So the next interesting thing that Papworth observed was that there were several distinct depressions in the ground that he identified as footprints. And they went right along the pathway of the tire track. Now, he says that some were from Detective Werner accessing the scene for the first time the day before, but he said that some were definitely left by the killer. And he could tell this because they were distinctly older than Detective Werner's. I mean, and they were a different size, but they were distinctly older was the main thing. And this is because the leaves were constantly falling. They created kind of a natural timeline because as the leaves fell, they wilted, they died, and they changed colors. And they had different moisture content depending on how long ago they had fallen. So this part also goes back to what we were just talking about on where was Jenny and what the heck, where was she when he was doing this? Because they found more impressions by a fern in the woods. And the fern not only had missing like leaves. I don't know if you guys are familiar with a fern, or you can Google it. It's a stem with broad leaves, but some of the stems, full stems were missing, and the leaves were just stripped off of them. So they found more impressions by a sword fern that clearly had missing and stripped fronds.
Pretty sure that's a fancy word for leaves, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So this was interesting because when they, said that the killer was moving hastily, this also backed up that theory, because when they saw the bike, they noticed that it was only half covered in these fern fronds, and they had observed a clear pathway of several footprints back and forth between the rear of the bike and the fern. And like I said before, some fronds were missing and broken, and others were just stripped. So it looked like the person tried to just grab them at first, but stripped only the leaves and then tried again. And we know this because along with a bunch of footprints, there was also a deep heel impression by the fern, which suggested that the person had braced themselves and had to pull pretty hard to get those fronds out.
It's crazy what they can tell, like how they knew that he like went back and forth because it was that overgrown that you could see.
Well, and that he knew what it was. Like, he knew that was a heel impression. Like, it's just amazing.
So it sounds like he gave up like halfway of covering the bike.
Right. And, like we said, he's not only does he wheel the bike in there hastily, but now he's trying to cover it up. Where's Jenny? Is she still alive? What if she wakes up? He must have been panicking. I can't imagine. And it seems like that because later they actually were able to match the fronds covering the bike to the broken stems that were left in the plant. So then Papworth didn't examine the path from the bike to the body, but he did examine the body and the site where she was located. Of all the descriptions of the site I read, I understood and was able to picture it from his description the best. And also, I noticed the difference between a trained outdoor crime scene deputy coroner and the detective's description. Love the detective, give him all the credit in the world, but his measurements were a little off and his observations were not the same. So I'll share with you guys Papworth's description, and hopefully you'll be able to picture it too. He wrote that the area was unique. He said that Jenny's body laid in a circular, room-like space that was 10 feet across. The floor of this room was covered 1.5 inches deep with fir tree and cedar tree needles. So like pine needles.
Well, not pine, it's fir and cedar.
Those are pine trees.
Oh.
We're totally leaving that in. There wasn't enough sunlight for any plants to grow. So I'm picturing an almost soft bed of these needles. I watched that survival show Alone, and they make beds when they have to survive out in the wilderness of this kind of stuff. Papworth explained that the space was like an enclosed room, and then he described the walls. The east wall was formed by a fallen down but still growing cedar tree, and it formed a screen with its vertically growing branches. The north side was formed by a large 30-inch diameter tree trunk cedar and dense evergreen huckleberry bushes that were 8 to 10 feet tall. The western wall was a large, decayed, blown down root mass. So I'm thinking when you're going through the woods and you're on a hike and, a storm had come and knocked over a tree and you see the big roots that are exposed, that's kind of what this was. And it had, a large ridge of root and dirt. And then on top of that, a 7-foot ocean spray shrub. I don't know what half these plants are, but it was growing on top of it. Additionally, a Himalayan blackberry vine grew over the ocean spray, which created more of a wall. Finally, the southern wall was formed by a luxuriant growth of evergreen huckleberry shrubs. Some of them, he reported, were more than 10 feet high. All of this surrounding foliage formed this dense canopy that had enclosed and completely concealed Jenny's body.
So none of this was man-made at all?
No.
How many years do you think it took for it to naturally create this?
Oh my gosh. A lot, I would think. I mean, I don't know much about, trees and growing stuff, but I actually kill every plant I have ever owned.
When I hear this, it makes me think of True Detective, the first one, where all the natural, because it was in the bayou.
Oh, yes.
It's like that natural.
Yes.
No one can see, but I'm making my hands.
Interlock.
Yeah, that's it. That kind of thing.
Yes. Well, and so that's the other thing too is think of how many people searched and searched and searched and nobody stumbled upon this. So how long was this killer out there scouting? I mean, he found this place. He knew this place was there.
Maybe this was somewhere he went when he was younger too, little. Like
it could be.
To know that kind of place definitely would tell me, I would think it's a local.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's got to be. It's got somebody that goes to that park a lot. Yeah.
For them to have searched all those search and rescue teams and not find that, especially with all of the Y in the road reporting.
Yeah.
And the search dogs.
I know. What the heck?
They're fired.
Retire them all.
But that also is if the dog stopped at the Y in the road, like, did he pick her up right? He must have just grabbed her and ran right in. Yeah, and put her there immediately. Like, he probably didn't set her down anywhere else because I feel like the dogs would have picked up on the scent.
Yeah. Yep, that's a good point. Papworth went on to explain, and he wrote that there was only one single approach from the west to this secluded space, just like Detective Margison had also described in his report. Papworth purported that this site was prepared by the killer due to there being several broken off dead limbs and the appearance of minor obstructions being removed on the periphery of the hiding space. So it suggested that he'd been there several times before and was making it easier to get to, in addition to how perfectly hidden it was and how Jenny's body was meticulously posed. Papworth believed that the killer had practiced this in fantasy, if not previously acted out with another victim in another place, like maybe Michella. It's important to note, too, that Papworth did not perform the autopsy on Jenny. His role was to assist in the observations at the scene, so all of his examination of her body was superficial, for lack of a better word, meaning he didn't touch her or move her. When he did look at her, he observed Jenny to be missing 2 teeth, and they were incisors, which is either your front tooth or the tooth right next to your front tooth. I had to Google that, which led him to believe that she was initially struck with 1 or more hard blows to the face at the point of her assault, which was likely on the road. Then he described seeing parts of what looked like a twine ligature still around her neck, which led him to believe she was most likely strangled into unconsciousness for the trip to the hiding place. This observation, coupled with the observation of a sharp-edged opening at her throat, plus the levels of decay in her neck area being so much further along versus in her extremities, He believed she was ultimately killed with a knife to her throat at the conclusion of what he called a semi-ritual slaying. Papworth went on to explain that he did not believe the killer was stalking Jenny or had picked her out in advance because of the much different and reckless treatment of the bicycle. He said that while the body was clearly handled with meticulous planning, the bike was not. And because Jenny always had her bicycle, if she was being stalked or was the specific target, the bike would have been included in his strategy. He goes further and says that this suggests that Jenny was a generalized target of opportunity. The scene and fantasy were established for a young girl, and a victim was selected when the time was right. She just happened to be riding a bicycle. Papworth closed his report with the following sentiment to investigators. Quote, having worked on the recent cases in Lewis, Snohomish, and Thurston counties, it is my opinion that Bastian and Welch are two of a kind, but set apart from the others. Tacoma has its own distinct nightmare. Good luck.
Join us next for part 3 of our 4-part series of Taken Too Soon in Tacoma, where we will take you through the beginning years of the investigation, its grueling ups and downs, and countless dead ends, until a shocking revelation turns these cases upside down and changes the way investigators pursue the case. We want to say thank you again to all of our listeners for coming back for episode 2, and remember, if you like what you heard, please help us grow our audience by telling all your friends and leaving a 5-star rating and review. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the show so you don't miss a thing. Follow us on Instagram at Cells Podcast and check out all the bonus material like photos and documents on our website, cellspodcast.com. We look forward to continuing to dive down the rabbit holes with you while we unlock some of the craziest cold cases you've most likely never heard of. Until next time, and remember, if you ever find yourself in a scary situation,
put up a fight. Scratch, kick, scream, bite. Get that DNA.